through the length of the time of the conference. And then after the intervention of Mr. Serge Salat, we will open the ground for discussion and question. I think I can leave the floor to Professor Frassoldati for a brief introduction, and then to Serge Salat.
Thanks, Daniele, and good afternoon, and welcome to this fourth appointment with the lecture organized by Architecture, City and Construction Master Program and Architecture, History and Project PhD program. We are very pleased to have with us Serge Salat this afternoon, talking with us from Paris. Serge Salat is a colleague we share many interests with, particularly related to the potential of using and studying urban morphology in order to apply better tools to our urban and architectural design. Serge is a writer, a designer, but his interest is not limited to that and span to economics and environmental sustainability. For this reason, he has served as advisor for a number of international institutions, IPCC, United Nations, World Bank, and many national governments, including the Chinese government, particularly on the topic related with making cities better in terms of environmental and social organization. The topic he will discuss with us in the afternoon are related with urban morphology and particularly based on his understanding of the Italian city, something you know pretty well, hopefully, and something you can't experience live at the moment, but I'm sure what we learn from the cities we live in is also relevant for understanding right now the value of city form and city dynamics. Serge Salat is lecturing in a number of international universities in France, the US, China, and Italy as well. This is also the reason why we had many opportunities in the past to meet him in Torino. Actually, he loves the city in which we work and study, and we hope to have him very soon back with us once we will move back to our classroom. Thanks, Serge, for being with us.
Okay, thanks a lot for this nice introduction. Yeah, I do love Torino. Shall I start now? Okay, I suppose it's yes, the floor is mine. Okay, so I have decided to address the question of city form and city morphology from the angle of beauty, and but you will see that the beauty angle as will lead us to complexity theory and notions of resilience and efficiency, and not just to aesthetics. So first, I'd like to start by the Beauty Will Save the World by Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and then a quotation of Pope John Paul II quoted the line in Letter to Artists, and that reading the saving power of beauty. So actually, we are facing times of crisis, not only climate change crisis, but also pandemic crisis. So we need a value to save us, and this value might be beauty in a sense. And the Pope is talking, people of today and tomorrow need this enthusiasm of wonder if we are to meet and master the crucial challenges which stand before us. Thanks to this enthusiasm, humanity, every time it loses its way, will be able to lift itself up and set out again on the right path. In this sense, it has been said with profound insight that beauty will save the world. So let's before I comment on these lines here, let's try to set the beauty in the beauty in a more elaborated way by remark. The universe is beautiful. There is an intrinsic beauty in the order of the universe, and there is also an intrinsic beauty in life, in life forms, in plants, in trees, in not only the vast universe and the galaxies, but any type of life form is really beautiful. And the comment is that the universe is not obliged to be beautiful. Nothing obliges the universe to be beautiful. Nothing obliged to have harmony and order, and we'll inquire more about what is this beauty of the universe, and that we may find in cities. So if the universe is beautiful, it brings us to the question of meaning, of the universe, in a sense, as some kind of underlying order into it, and any life form, let's say any leaf or a tree, a butterfly, a bird, as an intrinsic beauty, which delivers a message of harmony and of sense, of meaning. And my point is that my key point is that cities for centuries, millennium, had this type of beauty that is also the beauty of the true and the good in Neoplatonism, and of the cosmos, like and these configurations of the cities were relating to beauty very directly to the cosmos, like in ancient China cities, or in many cities. The beauty of the city, like the Roman city foundation ritual, which was creating the Cardo and the Decumanus, and vertically the Mundum and the Templum, and linking the city form to the cardinal points, like in China, related very directly the city to cosmic forces. So the concept of the beautiful city, not only the beautiful architecture, not only the Venus does in architectural theory, but the concept of the beautiful city of Plato was very much, the concept of beauty was very much linked at a very deep with a very deep meaning to the concept of city. And this linkage between city and beauty spanned antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance, and the 18th century, and the Baroque period, the 18th century, and the city started to stop to be linked to beauty somewhere during the Industrial Revolution, where the city became more like an industrial machine and the city was more associated to poverty, to an influx of people to produce, and then the city was associated to functions, to functionality, but not that much to form and beauty. Another aspect is that the city is superlatively beautiful. Actually, the city first is the most complex artifact created by mankind. You cannot find something more complex than a city, something which is also spanning 2,000 years, like Torino, like most of the cities, but which are the legacy of the Roman Empire, and Roma is even more. Roma is 2,700 years. So there is something that is the most complex and the most time resilient and the most embedding history and culture artifact created by mankind. And this intrinsic beauty is really superlative. And for example, Peggy writes that literally there's ever been cities are the creations that have ever been the most beautiful in the world. The two things which are the most beautiful in the world for Peggy is the friendship and the city, and we will see also the link between friendship and city. Then we discover. We must learn again to discover beauty and the feeling of beauty in cities, even fleetingly, even in fragments of cities, like the world or an animated body. A city must be beautiful, otherwise it will shock and disappoint. It will be, and the contrary of beauty in cities is chaos, and we'll see that later on. And chaos is wrong, basically. And François Chang, which I have been quoting at the very beginning, is in his 5 meditations about beauty, when he says that the universe is not obliged to be beautiful, is opposing very strongly in his book the beauty and evil. Actually, beauty is opposite of evil. This is very much linked to the Neoplatonism, basically, where beauty is a good. So we'll see what it means on aesthetic terms, so to see also what it means in terms of urban organization. So let's come to what makes a city beautiful. I have tried to summarize. That doesn't mean that there are 8 laws of urban beauty and only 8, or that is 8. 8 for the Chinese is also very much resonating, because everything good should have 8 properties, or 8 properties of any good concept. So first, time depth. That means that you have time duration embedded in the city. Second, order and diversity, or organized complexity, neither too disordered, not too ordered. And this is probably, it comes in 2 because it's created by time depth, it's created by time, it's created by the accumulation of time. But it's really the key point of my lecture, the organized complexity, creating beauty. And the universe is beautiful because it's an organized complexity, constantly recreating itself. A leaf, a tree is beautiful because it's organized complexity. Life, an architecture of hollow space as well designed as that of built volumes. And this transcends the story of public realm, and this transcends the division between buildings and infrastructure. And I will explain that in more detail. Staging, creating a cinematographic or theatrical atmosphere experience in cities with number 6, sequences and mystery. And sequences and mystery is a way to address it from a human experience, address the issue of linkages and streets. And so you must move, you should move from infrastructure, which is creating roads for cars, to streets for people. But at the end, it's not even about streets. It's about lines of movement with sequences of movements and sequences of discovery, bringing both orientation and mystery into a city. It's about the city as a language for people in movement, and as a storytelling for people in movement. Materiality and geometrical abstraction. Cities are both something highly material. We'll describe that. And embedding also and structure by geometrical abstraction, and identity and color and specific color, and color is really it's also linked to materiality. It's a key aspect of cities. Each city, in a sense, has its own color, deriving from the local material and the use of the local material and the use of the texture. And it's not only color that creates identity, but color should be also brought back into the story of morphology. So we'll take examples, and we'll go more deep into these laws of urban beauty. And then we'll see all these laws of urban beauty create adaptiveness and resilience. And then I could elaborate more on how they create sustainability, energy efficiency. And this I will not elaborate too much. Energy and and other aspects and inclusiveness. They are in many of my papers I have written. So you have these laws of beauty, basically. And so some I will illustrate quite quickly and briefly, and some I will go more in depth, because time depth, the stratification of history in cities like it's been explored by Aldo Rossi, for example, and people like him, would require an entire week of lectures. So I will just give an example about the way the time depth succeeds to be embedded in cities. At the bottom, you have an ideal city formerly attributed to Piero della Francesca. So this is Renaissance. This is and you have the paving, and you have the regularity, you have the symmetry, you have the buildings. And on the top, you have a picture we have taken in Arezzo. Actually, we have taken the picture in a different format, and just by chance, the picture started to be framed in this format. Oh, sorry, I just need to move, yeah. And this picture for me appeared very similar in a sense. We don't see the right-hand side here to the Piero della Francesca, but there is a feeling of harmony and balance in this picture of Arezzo. But in reality, you have many different temporalities. You have medieval houses. You have a Renaissance palace. You have also a Renaissance palace with columns here. You have a church which doesn't more early, more Romanesque than this Renaissance building, and they end up under the same roof, creating a composite unity. And then you have this, which is not Tempietto, which is the back of a very early Romanesque church, just during the 8th century or something similar. And then you have this, which is also medieval. So you have very many different epochs. Then you have this is totally symmetrical. This is not symmetrical, and the floor of the square is very clearly sloping. So anyway, you have time depth in this square in Arezzo, which creates a feeling of harmony and of combination. In Torino, and I think this is my second example, you have Palazzo Madama, and I will use Palazzo Madama a lot, and which is articulating with Iapu and with the Quadrilatero Romano and with the main axis leading to the palace, and here you have Piazza San Carlo. And so this acts as a kind of rotational element, which is for me, Palazzo Madama is really the center of Torino. It's a super rotational element between the different morphologies of Torino and the different axis systems of Torino. And the Palazzo Madama is a fascinating building because, as you know, being in Torino, it's an unlikely combination of a Roman gate, and here it's not Palazzo Madama, but it's still a Roman gate in Torino, and an impressive Baroque staircase. So between the Roman gate, first century, and the Baroque staircase, you have you span easily 17 centuries, and sorry, yes, here it is. And the Baroque staircase and all the facade of the Palazzo Madama is just one staircase. And here it's taken from the Palazzo Madama. You have it embeds the original Roman gate of the city, and here you have the Baroque staircase, and here you have the rest of the city, which unfortunately doesn't appear on my screen because of the images. And here you see it. Here you have the medieval castle. Here you have the Roman gate, and here you have and here you have the Baroque staircase, and this comes into one single building. And this layering of different epochs is is really for me one of the key characteristics of the Italian city. This kind of happy layering of different periods, and nowhere probably as it's nowhere as impressive as in Palazzo Madama, but it's not just the Palazzo Madama as an object. It's Palazzo Madama as a kind of rotational element within a highly complex urban structure, which has been created through about 2,000 years. And this evolution process, and I will come back at the very end of why evolution is creating organized complexity. This long time span of evolution is creating organized complexity. Once again, not all initial city form can create organized complexity. The legacy of the Roman Empire planning has been able to create organized complexity and unique cities all around the Mediterranean and all over Europe. New York is a city creating organized complexity constantly. Unfortunately, in 1 hour, I have no time to explain New York, so I have entirely skipped New York. And organized complexity is places where buildings, public realm, and street patterns, and I insist not just buildings, public realm and street patterns, must be coherent, must have a particularity, and we like Manhattan, London, Paris, Firenze, Turin, Kyoto, and many other cities, because they have this type of organization and complex organization. And conversely, disordered cities are just aggregates, or cities with very few, and aggregates are a lot of urban development, not only slums, but suburbia is aggregates, small urban houses, all identical in a shapeless growth, is just an aggregate. Or cities with very few large repetitive elements, like the ones promoted by Le Corbusier in his city of 3 million inhabitants, inspired by machines. So I think just cities with very few large repetitive elements are machines. And aggregates and machines, as when they are cities, make us really uncomfortable, and we cannot relate to them. And they don't satisfy the need of our mind for order and legibility. And too much order is alienating. It seems rigid, and we cannot even relate to it. So too much disorder is alienating, and too much order is alienating. So if we come more into a kind of theoretization of this, you have complexity on this x-axis, and you have quantity of objects there. So if you don't have enough objects, and randomness at the same time, and large numbers. So if you have very few objects, like we've been talking this morning on the subject of plots. Just Manhattan was initially created with 300,000 plots, 205 meters each, and then they started to diversify in size and in shape by aggregating and creating a very diversified urban fabric. So when you have 300,000 plots, the combinatoric exponential, there is a combinatoric exponential explosion of the way of the possibilities of the potential for combining these plots. This creates organized complexity systems. When you have very few number of plots, and I've been comparing with a typical Chinese new development, where you have only 250 super blocks and not divided into plots. How can you you don't have an explosion of combinatorial possibility, and you have organized simplicity, and we'll see what it is. And this is organized simplicity of machines. And the modernist movement was really claiming that mechanization should take command. Mechanization takes command is the title of the very famous book by Siegfried Gideon. And then if you have a lot of elements like suburbia or slums, or suburbia is just a slum for the middle class, by the way. You have unorganized complexity and aggregates, and actually the beautiful city is there. Okay, we won't have time to make the mathematics of this, but a big part of my work is to make the mathematics of these type of things. So always organized complexity created. Organized complexity is a subtle blend of order and disorder, and it is the order of an open system that can only be maintained by a certain degree of disorder. So this is very much also relates to laws of thermodynamics, and so to the laws of life and to the way the universe is evolving. And any complex system is evolving beyond equilibrium by incorporating energy and creating new structure. So it creates more and more structure by absorbing energy, and by and the structure becomes more complex due to its fluctuations. And so this is this type of open order. And this order is produced by, and in city planning and in city design and city growth, it is produced by a flexible form, produced by the structure of relation, by the structure of linkages. The structure of linkages should be open enough to allow this growth of complexity. And this irregular complex order gives coherence and beauty, and that diversity is diversity within coherence and order. And this is basically created by modular organization, where the elements are strongly linked by, the closed elements are strongly linked by short-term range coupling force into modules, and the modules are then interconnected by weaker force, and so on, with weaker and weaker coupling forces with long range. And to explain this story of module, we can take Venice as an example, where initially Venice was a series of very small islands in the lagoon, and each island was a community around the piazzetta, and then you had a church, and then you have a school, and then you have this community life, and you still have this, and the linkage was very close range. And then the different modules, meaning the different islands composing Venice, became to be to establish linkages and canals and at wider scale, and ended up into Venice. And yeah, very nice here. The optimal sequence to create a complex evolving city is as follows: define open space, green space, pedestrian space, empty. Actually, all these communities in the small islands in Venice were defined around the piazzetta. And then you define pedestrian connections or water connections in the case of Venice, and then you define the buildings, and then you define another level of pathways, and you create a growing sequence of the evolving city, with still a complexity in the pattern. You know, I would like to give an homage to one of my sources of inspiration, Christopher Alexander and Nikos Salingaros, with the concept of pattern language, where in good city form, each element has a variety of as an overlapping definition. So you cannot just separate. In a complex system, you cannot separate elements with single monofunctions. Just a very simple example. And when you look at this in Venice, is it an open space or is it a closed space? It's both, actually. Is it a connection or a space? It is both, actually. So, and the urban space of a city then must connect in a giant chain that includes large and small spaces, open and closed space, bright and dark. And Venice is a labyrinth with 1,500 intersections, with one of the highest density of intersections per square kilometer, just when counting the streets. And if we add the canal system and the water system, Venice will have even more intersections. It's super interconnected space, but the connected space moves through the, and here, for example, yeah, of course, you can divide this into one building and the passage, but it makes also a complex unity of passage, stair, canal, and building. So we have this growth of complexity from modularity. And then in good city form, symmetry brings order to architecture and to urban space. So this leads us to, so as I was telling, complex order and ordered complexity, organized complexity. So symmetry is a big element, and including in the cosmos and in life forms. So fundamental definition of symmetry in mathematics is invariance in a group of geometric transformations. And we're just going to see 4 types of symmetry. Translation, which is quite well known. Moving forward, we translate. Rotation, we spin. Mirror, we look at ourselves in a mirror. And one which is less known, but I've been working a lot, and my book Citizen Forms is very much about this, is scaling symmetry, which is by enlargement or reduction. You enlarge the form or you scale down the form, and you find either self-similar or what is called in fractal theory self-affine, and we'll see more about it, form. And the issue is that when symmetry is pure symmetry, it's boring and it's pure order. And when it is accompanied by variation, this order is rich, complex, and dynamic. So I will give some examples of that. Examples of translation symmetry without variation. Actually, this is Sarcelles in France, in the Paris region, but it could be a lot of cities in China, except that in China it will be much more oversized. It will be much bigger, the buildings. And this is a type of urbanism advocated by the modernist movement. And this is in Delft, is symmetry with variation. And so we're going to see more about it. First, it is very public space, which is like a curving funnel like this. And here you have the castle, and here you have the houses that we are going to see. And you see the curvature, and this is created entirely by Italian architects in the Czech Republic. And you see the city is almost only this square on the kind of a piece of land which is narrowing and turning like this. And the house's first variation is the fact that it is turning, and the houses are turning, and there is curvature. Then you have high diversity, and nevertheless a unity in the walls, the openings, the roofs, and the color is extremely diverse. But here you see in the color diagram that the colors are subtly changing and very pastel and belonging to the to same families with gradation. So then you have an interesting thing is that when the Italian Baroque architects were working in the Czech Republic, they couldn't have the sculptural quality of columns, but so they painted it. There is a lot of painted architecture, including in Kassel in Czech Republic, done by Italian architects. And so, but the fascinating thing, you may not like this type of architecture. It's not the point. The point is that you have an endless variety based on the few rules and the same language with symmetry here. But then you have columns, then you have this, and you could create endless facades by using this vocabulary. Here, and it goes to the most minute detail of windows. Not the window is exactly identical to another window, but they unmistakably belong to the Telch family of windows. So here you see it. Unfortunately, this has disappeared below no, it doesn't look like masquer les participants sans vidéo. Yes, wonderful. I succeeded to mask the other participants. Okay, no, it will be better to see the. And then you have some exceptional houses, like this one, house 61, which is translation symmetry with variation and mirror symmetry. So we have a consistent use of translational symmetry with variation. Another example of symmetry is the rotation symmetry, Well, here you see without variation, a lot of ideal cities from the 17th to the 18th century, which basically create a very, some are remaining in plan, some have been built, create a very strong sensation of disorientation. And here you have, because everywhere in every quadrant is exactly the same thing. And here you have Siena, as you recognize it, which has a fan-shaped system of streets converging here. So you have clearly a rotational symmetry. You have clearly an attractor in the middle, but there is a very strong variation. And as I am a bit in Siena, the Piazza del Campo in Siena is a point of maximum intensity of a network of piazze, which constitutes the nodes of the urban structure. So here you see the complexity of the street pattern. And then you have this convergence like this in the Piazza del Campo, which is here. And this is a blend of convergence, symmetry, and very careful planning. There is nothing organic in the medieval city, Italian city, or in the medieval city in general. Everything is planned, except that it's planned differently than we plan with grids and orthogonality. It's planned with curves, but it took 2 centuries to Siena people to create the square here, to remove the houses, to really create the building, and it's entirely designed. It's absolutely not organic at all, and it's pure design. Here you have the sundial, you have organization, you have the closure of space, and this is not a topic here, but I deliver a lot of lectures about the how to create this feeling of closure. Which is creating positive space. Positive space is a space which has a form. We'll explain that later on. And then you have entry, you have doors, gates, and then you have another street here, and you have an aspect that I will describe later on, which is the streets are not opening. It's totally opposite to Torino. The streets are not going to the landscape, are not opening to infinity, but the view from the street is very quickly broken, and actually it's broken first by the entry door, and is broken then by the fact that you have the circular street around. Examples of actual mirror symmetry. You have the Le Corbusier city of 3 million inhabitants, and then symmetry with variation. You have, of course, the system of axis in Torino, where the Palazzo Madama, again, is playing the role of a very much articulation between the axes. And you see that around each axis, there is a lot of variation created, and a lot of events happening, like of course Palazzo Madama, but also the front and the back, and then it turns, and then you have Yapo, and then you have phenomena of opening and closing, and then you have the urban the street here which are perpendicular, and here they are slanted at an angle. So you have at the same time an axis which would call for bilateral symmetry on each side and mirror symmetry, but actually what's happening is that things are different from on each side of the axis, while having some real strong consistency, because here you have an orientation this way, and then it changes to a perpendicular orientation. Same type of things in Paris. I will go faster. Here you have Palais Royal, Musée du Louvre. Here you have Place Vendôme, which is also carved within inside an existing urban fabric, and Avenue de l'Opéra. And all these axes here and here, and even here, in a sense, include some subtle or less subtle variation around the axis. Here you see very clearly that Avenue de l'Opéra is not symmetrical. There is almost symmetrical, but underlying not so symmetrical. And then you have examples of scaling symmetry, which for me is one of the most important of it. Without variation, this is an Indian mandala, and with variation, this is Tang Chang Han, the long piece, Chang Han. And here you see that you have a system of axes, but and you have seemingly a bilateral symmetry. Actually, if I was showing Beijing, we will see that a very asymmetry with the lakes, and there's plenty of asymmetry. We'll see Beijing later on. But what I really want to focus on is the block here, where you will see here that you have an organization, and then if you scale down, you arrive to the block, and then you have the organization, the actual organization with the series of gates, and the series of gates are opening on different types and different sizes of large courtyards. And then the block itself, if you zoom in here, you have another block which is exactly the same thing, but at a reduced scale. And then when you start to look, and the axis now, you have a highly different, but then you have an axis here, which is a major axis of Beijing, Forbidden City, where you see the expansion, and here the curve, we'll see that more. But now if you look here within the Forbidden City, you find again the system of axes here, you find again the system of axes here, you find again the system of axes. So it's smaller axes with smaller buildings within a system of north-south axiality. And if you look at the block now that was here, and we start to put houses in, you see the combinatorial possibility of the Serge, the courtyard house in China. So this is scaling. And here you have the main axis in the Forbidden City, where here you have the river here, the Golden River here. And if you look at the reality in the hutongs in Beijing, at least what remains of the hutong, you see this versatility of the same courtyard house and the same courtyard organization is always changing and always transforming. So, and it creates this type of and so you can scale, you can create this scaling urban fabric either in decrescendo or in crescendo. The first technique, the crescendo, you start from the large scale and you create voids in the lower scale. And while the second techniques, you start from the smaller scales and you complete the upper scales by adding structure to them. So the Serge is the way of creating this type of fractal organization. But at the same time, you have a balance between the two. It's not just like the decrescendo and the crescendo work together, actually. It's not just an aggregate of Serge, the Chinese urban fabric, the Tangshangan, and then Beijing. It's not an aggregate. It's an aggregate organized by a series of scales at each upper scale and upper scale and upper scale. And when you have Roma initially was agreed, then became very complex and very, in a sense, disordered and too much disordered. And then the popes and Sixtus in Roma started to create the axes, the Corsos, the Tridente, the two churches, and like Haussmann in Paris, but much before, started to create a larger order in the city form. Here you see the Tridente again, and here again, and Via del Corso, and the shape factor of the Via del Corso. Here, and Via del Corso inside. So then, so this continuous interplay between emergence of irregularity and interventions of regularization, which were once again at exactly the same scale to create scaling property, which are described by inverse power laws, and that I refer you to my papers. And life now. The beauty of the city, as Plato and the Greeks understood it, exceeded the strictly aesthetic dimension of modern beauty, and that polis in Greek designates more a political constitution than a city. And the beautiful city is a city where reigns between its inhabitants an understanding of philia, of fraternity, of friendship. And this is really a key concept. We would benefit very much to, instead of talking about inclusive city, which probably doesn't mean a lot, to talk about, to come back to make it in a more elaborated philosophical way, and concord, fraternity, friendship. That was what was deeply is a city, and we should probably start by that rather than starting by building things and then trying to make these things inclusive. Actually, the should start by the ritual, by the community, by the people. Just some pictures to illustrate that. The street from its origin, far from constituting an emptiness, and that's a problem. That's why I was so criticizing the inclusiveness added afterwards. Actually, we create cities from functional consideration. We create streets that, as Le Corbusier says, are machines to circulate. And then we create universal space in between buildings, which is shapeless and which is not, which is an emptiness and an absence of space. And then we would like this to become inclusive. But actually, the street originally is not an emptiness, it's not an absence, it's not a circulation. It is a space which allows a temporary materialization of emerging urban sociability constantly to start again through festivals and various celebrations. Actually, in our time of confinement, this is not what it is. But basically, if you look at that Carpaccio detail of the healing of the possessed, what is really interesting, it's all these processions happening in streets. And the beauty of city actually is the rhythm of the community. This expression used by Benjamin in his portrait of Naples. This whole architecture is realized here, and the most significant piece of architecture in Naples for Benjamin is the rhythm of the community. And the multitude, it leads its dance, exists, and lies the beauty of Naples. And the beauty in Venice is also eurythmy, happy rhythm, which proceeds from the gestures of urban dwellers, more than from the symmetry of building there. Venice is a super beautiful city, but it doesn't embed any symmetry. It doesn't embed major urban axes, but the beautiful arrangement of spaces created around communities in movement, and this dispersion, gathering notes, dynamics and rhythm, and singular and plurality, gathering and dispersion, contraction and expansion. This is a type of dynamic unity of Venice, which is also created by the really created by the urban form in a super subtle way. And streets as places for people is the Corso. I have been showing the Corso first, but the Corso is not just a unifying street in Rome. First is a narrow street and this tall street, and it's not at all for circulation. Actually, the Corso is a ballroom, and the street floor is where the majority of participants are concentrated. And the palaces have balconies filled with people. It's exactly like a ballroom. And the street walls are the walls of the buildings. And this is something I will come back at length in a few minutes. And the street roof is the sky, is the firmament. And actually, if you have the cornices here, like in Torino, you will capture the sky as the roof of the street, and it ends up into the street being a ballroom. And this is achieved by design, and it's not just like an ordinary street where you will afterwards make the carnival. So this leads us to an architecture of hollow spaces as well designed as that of full volumes. This is an interesting picture, I think, because I wanted to start with this, because there is some ambiguity. If you look at that, actually, there is no ambiguity, but there could be some ambiguity that looks quite a lot like an outside facade with the outside windows, and then a series. And I could show you pictures in Amsterdam with I should do that with the series of doors like that, but except that the series of doors like that are in an urban outdoor environment, and this is not an urban outdoor environment. This is a salone in the palazzo in Venice. So the indoor is designed like outdoors. It's also the Cappella Medicis of Michelangelo in Firenze. And so the greatest beauty of a city is not in the buildings, it is in the free space between the building. And the great craftsmen of city are sculptures of space, is a quotation by Georges Duhamel. But actually crafting, sculpturing the space means creating an architecture of the hollow space. And when you look, this is very famous in the urban morphology analysis. This is the map of Rome by Noli and Piranesi. And here you see that you have in white the hollow space. And here you see something fundamental. If you compare to any contemporary 20th century or 21st century map, it doesn't divide the urban reality into infrastructure and buildings. Actually, you don't even see buildings here. You just see, yeah, you may see buildings in black, but this is also a building and it's in white, and it's Santa Maria sopra Minerva, I think, and it's and you have the square, and you have then inside of the church, which is much bigger than the square. And here you have the Pantheon, which is the same size and circle, and there's an architecture than the hollow space, be it the space of the streets, or the space of the church, or the space of the palazzi, as an architecture, and then if you look at it in black, so as usually buildings should be represented in black, you suddenly realize that all this hollow space is superbly is a superb architecture. Here you see it again. And here you see the Pantheon. And let's move a little bit inside, and some examples where you see the inside of Santa Maria dei Fiori in Firenze, and here you see Piazza San Pietro in Roma, and this is exact. And unfortunately, I don't have an axonometric exploded drawing of the inside of Piazza San Pietro, but otherwise you will see that this is a major public realm. This is a major architecture. So, but there is no difference between the major architecture inside and the major architecture outside. That's the key point. Architecture is everywhere. So this design can be curved and irregular, and achieved by balance, achieved by contrast. And here you have the contrast between the void and the curved floor and the surrounding wall. Here you have a wonderful example of space created by balance, because everything is irregular, but the buildings, the sculptures, the galleries, the fountain, the floor respond to each other and balance each other and resonate in the manner of a musical harmony. Piazza della Signora in Firenze. Yes, and here you see the role the sculptures play into this. You have other techniques which consist in carving rectangular, regular geometries within the urban fabric. You have the Palais Royal, the Royal Palace in Paris, which is designed like this, and you have a large empty space carved in the more rectangular. Carved into the more irregular urban fabric. And this is not a result of Haussmann cuts, because this is in the beginning of the 18th century. So we have already triangular buildings in Paris. Place des Vosges, all this series of Place Royal squares, either in Paris at the very beginning of the 17th century, or this is Place des Vosges, Place Royale, in fact, and the Plaza Mayor in Madrid, which are also carved within the irregular urban fabric, consist in designing this space. And Torino, where I wanted to show Torino also quite quickly, because we have seen that already. And now we see the architecture of the hollow, the architecture of and the hollow is not the void. It's just an architecture where this is an architecture where the sky is the roof. Okay, and then you have this was interesting. You have a lot of irregularity within the block structure. I will come back to that. And you have regularization of the facades and the cornices by the Baroque to create the urban canyon and this architecture without a physical roof. Yeah, again and again, and the effects of discoveries and the effects of staging. Let's come back to Torino, and here you have this wonderful composition with the Royal Palace and with the Cappella della Sindone, and here, and this is a picture taken from Palazzo Madama, and here you have the two Guarino and Guarini churches. They are, and here you see something really important. The church here, San Lorenzo, is totally embedded in the Haven fabric. For a long time, I wanted to see this church because I know the great cupola, and I went something like four, 5 times to Torino, and I never really realized that this was this one, and that the entrance of the church was here. And same, the church in the palace is entirely embedded. So it's not the buildings are not the most exceptional thing. It's the inside of the buildings, but the real major thing is the composition of the square. And here, and here, and here, if you enter into it, then it is this inside space and the dynamism of the inside space that matters. And this is the Guarino Guarini Cappella della Sindone. And the work of staging, just an example, is the work of Michelangelo in the Capitoline Hall in Rome, where you have, this is in a sense not organized complexity. This is quite the topography and a sense of chaotic environment, the original state. And then Michelangelo started to work with an axis from here and started to create geometry, and started to create staging and organize that. As you are Italians, you know all of that. And he created, this is still in Italian, il Palazzo Senatorio in modo da creare una prospettiva rallentata che lo fa apparire più largo e più vicino. So you have this, when you have these trapezoidal shapes, either they go like this and it's an accelerated perspective and things at the end appear farther. But if you make it like this and like this, things appear closer and they appear bigger. So it's a very, very clever staging and manipulation of spatial perception. And it ends up creating order in space, in a space that was completely disordered, but once again, a very complex order where you have the trapezoidal shape and you have the pavement and you have the dynamism of the pavement. And here you have the stairway, and in the other way, side like this, and the shape is as the square is a feeling of enclosure by the sculptures here, which are opening at the same time. It's at the same time creating a delimitation and opening to the vast urban landscape of Rome. Here in and here there, this is super important to have this sculpture. So and another example, as we were talking about Venice before, you find again the type of trapezoidal shape here. So that means what? That means it's exactly like the Michelangelo example. When you look at Basilica San Marco, when you are in Piazza San Marco, appears closer and bigger and occupies a very important position in Piazza San Marco because of the effect of prospettiva rallentata, which is manipulation of space. And here also the Piazzetta is also, and there the prospettiva is rallentata, but there it is accelerata, it is accelerated. And then so this square, which is small, appears more in depth because of this. An important point here is that here it's quite dull, and actually it was not like this initially. Initially it was like this with a church, which was in an accelerated perspective, facing the Basilica San Marco, and but more, of course, reduced church and integrated into the urban fabric. The church was destroyed by Napoleon because he wanted to create his own palace. So you have all these elements of contrast and creating a very complex order in space. Sequences and mystery, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to accelerate. The fact that walking from one end to the city to another will offer a series of revelation. So here you see this very famous garden column, the consistence-scape. I'm giving this exercise to do to my students in Paris. And you have series of effects: convex, concave, picture frame, keyhole, deflection, invitation, dead end, full stop, tradesman's entrance. I have no time to comment on this. And this is at work on all these paths and the so the linkages is not just a functional linkage. It's not just a kind of power and religion linkage. It's really a perceptual linkage where space expands, open, closes, as effects of winds, as effect of getting closer, at effects, and you see also this Firenze is a Roman city. So you have the Roman grid, and in the Roman grid, you have this moving pathway, which is turning, and zigzagging. You have Prague also with the procession of the coronation of the king of Czechs of Bohemia. And another aspect is that this funnel appears in many great streets. Actually, most of the streets we consider as great and as the best streets in Europe have this funnel effects, like the Strøget in Copenhagen, where you see it here, and a fountain. And you have it in Bologna, a medieval quarter, Piazza di Porta Ravegnana. If I had more time, I will explain how you come from the narrow street. Sorry. Then the streets open here on the triangle, then the triangle narrows again. So then it reopens again, and then you have the verticality, and you see how narrow the street here, and with people here. So it's very canyon, and then it opens, and it doesn't open, the towers are not in the middle of emptiness. They are still in a small square, but they open vertically very, very strongly. And there is a staging of space, obviously. It doesn't appear this type, Via del Giubonari in Rome, this type of effect don't appear spontaneously in cities that have been designed. And a contemporary example is King's Cross in London, where you see the totally disordered area, and then the plan, which comes from, and you see these funnels almost everywhere in the plan, here and here, and then derives from the idea of creating lines of movement, public pathways, 20 new streets connecting to the existing streets. And the unfortunately, it's below myself. Here you have the triangle shape. Here you have the gas things, and here you have the new 20 new linking streets and 10 new squares and gardens. And they all part of a dynamism, I will show that very, very quickly, to this triangular or trapezoidal forms. So these lessons of traditional urban forms or historical urban forms can be still applied. Second shell pedestrian scale vision, a journey through Delft, from the new church to the town hall. So here you see, I will not comment everything, but you see how we go along the Neue Kerk, the new church, and then the space opens, and then you turn around and you have three churches, and the bell towers of the three churches are really, and here again you see the Neue Kerk, from which the journey started. It's a small journey, actually. There's a lot of events in this small area of Delft. And here you see in Malmö, the type of eco neighborhood in Sweden. You see that you have this triangular organization of the street pattern, which is like a fishnet, which has been distorted, and you see what it happens in reality. And you have the turning torso tower by Calatrava, and there is only one. It's better when you have three, like in Delft, but you have only one, but you can see it from into different urban settings, and it gives a shape to the urban space. Materiality and geometrical abstraction. This is one of my favorite things in Venice, where you have these very small, very ordinary square, Venetians, not tourists, and it's not at all a touristic area. And then when this is inside the square, and very basic things of defining urban space with just the bench and the tree and the shadow, and then you zoom out, and then you have a bridge, and then you have the canal, and then there is my favorite, probably one of my 2 or 3 favorite buildings in the world, Santa Maria dei Miracoli in Venezia, where you have and you have this a superb marble, open marble, mirror marble, and you have the geometric abstraction, and then you enter into it, and this once again is totally adjacent. So you have the combination of the most ordinary urban fabric and one of the most beautiful and mastery architecture, and then you zoom in and you have the Annunciation, which is actually here and here. These 2 small sculptures. So you have this combination of materiality and abstraction, which is also, and I have no time to detail what is written there, the pavement of San Marco Basilica, where you have this scaling, this intense materiality, but at the same time abstraction of the patterns, and the veneers of marble, symmetry, visual litany of patterns, uses the cleavage of the two halves, exactly the same thing as in Santa Maria dei Miracoli. And you see that the beautiful city has this type of materiality and design at the very at all scales, at very small scales. And you have perceptual effects for the eye in motion. Once again, not a lot of time to detail everything, but the fractal patterns over the Palazzo del Ducale in Venezia, where you have this reddish and white, and this may look like a losange pattern, but there is some ambiguity about how to connect the red marble between each diamond. Doesn't quite become a continuous diagonal because of the extra width of the step at the junctions. It's too subtle to explain, but there are some very, very subtle effects which create a ripple in the color as it runs across and up the wall. Seen from the ground, the shift is just enough to maintain a teasing ambiguity. But the interesting teasing ambiguity is if we take a frontal picture here, doesn't create so much a teasing ambiguity. But if we move on the water here, and especially with the light, the surface begins to dissolve. So the teasing ambiguity has transformed the surface into something moving. Identity and color. So historic cities are different from each other. It shows an irreducible identity, a singular flavor. Here is a Flemish style, Bruges, Firenze, different colors, Normandy. And let's come back to Delft again. Delft is also one of my favorite cities. Here you have the Neue Kerk, the Stadhuis here, and the Stadhuis is here. So there's something I try to explain to my students. Color shouldn't be something aggressive in city, but should be something at different scales and fractal. And then when it looks like more like a subtle and diffuse, but when we get closer, you have more intense color on the shutters, here on the gold, and here the white. And of course, if you look now at the picture, you can see the detailing. But if we get closer, you can see that the statue has its white and gold and different shades of gray, and the red here, and the more vibrant with the sun. And this gives, and Barcelona is totally different color effect, where here you see the Gaudi. And if you see Barcelona from not far away, but just at street scale, you see this type of color effect, especially in winter. But when you get closer, you see these effects on the Art Nouveau facades. So these are the characteristics of beauty, which come from actually organized complexity. So, and the interplay between emergence and design. So now, how can we relate this in 5 minutes to the fact that beauty creates sustainability and resilience? Let's become a little bit theoretical again. So scale-free structure, the urban system is made of many subsystems at different scales. The urban system displays a high diversity of sizes and scales. The urban system is complex, diversified at every scale. It is scale-free. Meaning that we don't have a specific scale of the urban system, like in Le Corbusier, where you have just the big scale and the big avenues, and this is the scale of the planning. Here you see design at all scales, including a shutter, including a door. A door is a piece of architecture. The scaling of urban elements obeys universal rule of complex systems. This could be also another entirely different lecture, because there is a maths behind this. Multi-connect, and this math is a math of that links the scaling, the math of scaling links cities to the universe, which obeys the same math. This is from this math of the mathematics of scaling that derives actually the intrinsic beauty of organized complexity. And there is multi-connectivity, which is organized complexity for linkages. The urban system is highly connected through a variety of short, medium, and long-range connection. No constraint in the hierarchy. A subsystem is of a given size scale can be directly connected to any subsystem, which is going to create emergence into the connections too, and mathematical regularities. And this comes from evolution. And why does evolution compose the world from a hierarchy of modules, like what we have seen? The parable of the two watchmakers by Herbert Simon. You have invented this parable, and he got the Nobel Prize not for the parable but for his global work in science, and he has a huge contribution to the complexity theory and to computer languages. And the story is very simple. If you have to build a watch like this, and the watch is made of 1,000 components, you may build the watch either without any hierarchy, and you are disrupted by telephone calls. So when you are disrupted, everything you have been building falls apart, and on average 500 pieces fall apart, and so you will take a tremendous amount of time to rebuild the 500 pieces on average. It could be 200 or it can be 800. But if you build like the Aurora, the watch by sub-assemblies of 10 pieces, and then you create a sub-assembly, a module of 10 pieces, which is not going to fall apart, then you create 10 pieces, you create 10 pieces, you create 10 pieces, and when you have 10 times 10 pieces, you create 100 pieces, and when you have 10 times 100 pieces, you create 1,000 pieces. So every time you never assemble more than 10 pieces at the same time, and nothing can fall apart more than 10 pieces. So on average, 5 pieces fall apart. So you may understand that you're going to build the system will be much more robust. And Herbert Simon used a bit of math to prove that evolution would never have been able to build anything like we know, the universe, living beings, without adopting this type of modular scaling process. And actually, the story is not that evolution is not God, so or maybe God, but you don't need a God called evolution to do that. It's just the fact that the things which are the systems which were not scaling, which had not the scaling properties, didn't thrive. They disappeared very quickly. And the only systems which had the scaling properties, which were built modularly, developed, and at the end created more and more sophisticated life forms. And the most sophisticated life form, because it has a conscience, being us. So in a sense, we have been built by, or not, we have survived, and we have been thriving through evolution because we have this. And cities is exactly the same thing. Cities that thrive should have this thing. And Torino has this, when you look at the Roman and early 15th century plan of Torino and plan of Torino today, you still feel the continuity in the Quadrilatero Romano, but you feel a lot of adaptiveness. You feel the church is embedded in the urban fabric. You find some that are palaces. You find more and more complexification of the courtyard. You see passages which are breaking through but something has remained through deformation. It is a grid. So the system created 2,000 years ago, about 2,000 years ago, is still there and has been progressively complexified. And it is really very fractal. And here, for example, it looks very much like a theoretical fractal, which is a Sierpinski carpet. So you have simplicity is there, and then it evolves, but it can evolve from here to here. And this actually is not desirable. Actually, it doesn't go through here. It goes from here to here. If it is sufficiently fine-grained, sufficiently able to recompose in brick and whatever, but if it is huge, enormous, humongous buildings, they cannot start to spontaneously evolve towards this like Torino has evolved for 2,000 years. Organized complexity is resilient. I'm going to finish on that in the last 2 minutes. This is, we don't look at the objects or the urban block or the evolution of the fabric. We look at the linkages. This is a leaf, and this is a city of Aurora in Portugal. And actually, this is also coming back to nature and the beauty of nature. And this is a delta here, a river. And this is in China, in Shanxi province, a river network in Shanxi province. And this is totally different scale. and size. This is a leaf, a tree leaf. So you can see that the two things, the river delta and the leaf, share a very similar organization, except one thing is that here you see a super connectivity at the lower levels of the organization in the leaf, which makes it much more resilient than the delta, because here it's a leaf where you have a damage here, and you will see what happens to the nutrients and to the flows. They are going to move through the damage. But leaves, this type of multi-connectivity is extraordinarily resilient, and the leaves cannot be destroyed by just an insect creating a hole or parasite into them. I'm almost at the conclusion. The leaf again, and Via del Corso in Roma, and the Tridente, and the secondary things, and it's very much similar to this, but it's not just a kind of visual similarity. It's a deep structural similarity. You can find these ideas in my book, Cities and Forms, Les villes et les formes sur l'urbanisme durable in French, and the book in Chinese too. And so thank you for your attention. I am sorry I took a little bit too much time.
Great. Thank you very much, Serge, for your intervention. It was really inspiring, and don't be worried about the time. We really enjoyed the presentation, even if it was a little bit too long than what was planned before. Maybe we can open the floor for some questions, and I would like to invite maybe students from group 5 to select one question from the set of questions you have sent to Mr. Salat yesterday. So if some of the students from the group 5 is available, please, the floor is yours. Okay, great. They are answering. So feel free to put on your mic and video, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Wonderful. But I don't
Hi,
see
good
you.
afternoon.
Can I see you?
Yeah, just 1 minute, sorry. Okay, let me just turn this on. Hi.
Okay, right.
Hi, good afternoon.
You know, it's more friendly because during this time, talking into emptiness and not seeing people to talk with, it's quite terrifying. Okay, what is your question?
So I have a questions according to the books that was written by Serge Salat, but it's about cities and form. So in the book, you discuss the relationship among the suburb, countryside, and nature. So I was wondering that because from the current urban planning, from the city to the suburbs, there is actually an interlocking relationship, and it says the suburbs plays a very important factor. So how do we grasp the planning from the city to the countryside, and how to imply a better transition of the suburb instead of destroying the countryside?
That's a super interesting question. I will have a workshop in Cornell next week about Chongqing and urban-rural relationships in Chongqing, and I'm supposed to lead the workshop of the students, and I'm not sure I fully have the answers to these questions. Actually, but let's move to the suburbs. the issue: do we really need suburbs? That's the question. If you look at the Italian city like Torino, where you are, there are no real suburbs in Torino. You have city extensions, but you don't have this thing called a suburb. And if you look at the when you are in the center of the city, the straight avenues, they just lead to the hills. When you are in Tuscany, in Firenze, you just have the hills around the city.
Yep.
So the concept of having a city, which and that's really a key point. In terms of operationalizing it, I don't know how to do it, but the key point in terms of history is that the city is originally defined by a wall, and the wall separates the city from nature. And the city is a place of civilization, and the nature is the place of wilderness or of agriculture or whatever. But the city is clearly something which is a wall, gates, and a square in the center. And this creates or a series of squares and a series of monuments which embody power and religion and temples in China and but the wall is really fundamental. Then the suburbs appeared, and first the suburbs were theorized by at the very during the 19th century, the city, the gardens movement in the UK, and then in the US, where there was plenty of land, and then this idea that suburban life, especially for Americans and wealthy Americans, is better than urban life. But is it really true? So the story of this, and it's true what you mentioned is totally true. The story of the urban expansion in the suburbs, destroying the countryside, is. But then the question, how can we make it better? It's kind of a tricky question for me, because we shouldn't make it first instead of trying to make it better. And a good example for me is Hong Kong, where you have 80% of the land in Hong Kong, which is no-go zone. You cannot go there to build things. And it had ended up into super highly dense city, maybe too dense, maybe not, I don't know. Personally, I like Hong Kong, but and even places in the new territories, but around it's still the hills and the nature. So they have quite well articulated the two. With and same in Korea, Seoul, you have 10 million people in 600 square kilometers. And then you have a lot of green coming in because some of the hills have been preserved. And then you jump through the nature, and then you have the new towns, which are highly compact and hyper-dense. So there are some examples in Asia where you don't have the suburban. Kyoto, I've been spending months in Kyoto, and I don't have this perception of Kyoto having a gigantic suburbia. Kyoto is just still Kyoto, and you can move, and when you move outside the main grid of Kyoto, you are in villages, and this is quite well done, close to nature, and nature is integrated, and actually the interface between nature and human life and kind of city form is mediated in Kyoto by the fact that it is villages where you still have the springs, the small temples, the nature, the ravines, and all this type of thing. So the concept of having a city which is defined highly dense and is not expanding outwards, and having villages, which was basically, it's exactly what it, if you look at maps from the of the evolution for the last 50 years, you find a clearly articulated structure with a city and the hierarchy of human settlements, which is fractal. Actually, that means you have secondary cities, and then you have tertiary cities, and then you have villages, and all this is a fractal development. In China, it's the same. You have something, and then it becomes a huge, enormous blob of urban expansion, which is covering, and in China, around Shanghai, it's covering several provinces. And this is something we should avoid. Actually, the problem is not to yeah, actually, if we are in the traditional way of human settlements organization, where you have a hierarchy of sizes in human settlements, you end up with the village where the relationship between nature and human built form and human settlement is very well mediated. Where when it is not well mediated is when you have this gigantic suburban thing. But we should start first by not making the suburban expansion, and some areas are not making it. So that's my best answer, because once you have the suburbia there, how can you repair the sprawl by giving a better place to nature? And actually, it will never be a real nature. It will be some kind of nature already. For me, it's quite fascinating when you look at in Paris, Greater Paris urban area. Can move. Everything is quite the landscape, the natural landscape is really entirely destroyed. Where was it like this? I was quite recently. Yeah, Kathmandu. Kathmandu is a nightmare. I had a workshop in Kathmandu in December, and yeah, you have like free cities, like we have free royal kingdoms. The royal kingdom of Lalitpur, Patan, is just the Durbar Square. The royal palace is just 5 kilometers away from the royal palace of Kathmandu. But these are quite defined entities, and in between, there is a gigantic sprawl occupying the entire valley, which is very different from what my own experience 25 years ago. The issue is that now it's done, and I absolutely don't know how to repair this. I'm not a specialist of sprawl repair, and that's a very good question. And the thing you can, and I think your government is going in the right direction by preventing now urban expansion and creating a kind of artificial scarcity of land by obliging cities not to develop new land, but to develop by infill within the existing land. Singapore is not bad also, because Singapore, due to the little amount of land available, you have a clear distinction between city and non-city, and Singapore is a garden. Singapore is not nature, but basically it's very well mediated what is built and what is garden. It's a city in a garden, and the city is a city in many gardens. And it has been successful at 5.5 million inhabitants area, people in an area as big as city of New York and 800 square kilometers. You have very good examples of that, but first, but these very good examples, like also Copenhagen green wages, there have been consistent policies for half a century, for 50 years, of defining not a wall, but defining boundaries of green areas where you cannot go and build. And so you have a clear boundary between nature and built form. And the problem of suburbs is that when you erase the boundary between nature and built form, you are facing a very big problem. And this very big problem, honestly, I think we have a lot of work to solve it, and I don't have instant solutions for doing that. Yeah. Okay, I hope I have satisfied your question. I don't. Yes,
thank you so much.
I don't have the magic way of doing it, but you have many examples in Asia where it has been done successfully.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a really interesting talk.
Thank you. And I would like to invite one student from group 12 to select one question from the set of questions they prepared. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you? Can I see you?
Yes, sure. Hello.
Okay, hello. Good to see you.
Thank you. So my question is, when we talk about urban efficiency and urban renaissance of a city, we also have to talk about the redundancy and economic affordability of that city. What is the challenge for poor developing countries to increase their own urban sustainability and resilience?
Wow, that's a wide question. That's a very wide question.
Yeah.
First, yeah, I had a workshop, very interesting World Bank workshop in Africa about the fact that the fragmentation of the city form is reducing agglomeration economies and integration, and prevents African countries to African cities to enter the market of tradable goods. So having this agglomeration and connectivity is a real challenge. Another real challenge is that I have, this is also part of the work I'm doing. Developing countries can absolutely not afford sprawl because, you know, you have the urban GDP per square kilometer. It's an inverse power law decreasing like this, meaning that, to put it in very simple terms, 20% of the urban land produce 80% of the GDP. And even in London or in New York, 1% of the urban land produces 14% of the GDP. So the GDP is highly concentrated, the production of GDP. So, and then the more you expand the city, the less marginal and additional GDP it produces. But the cost of infrastructure is not decreasing according to the same curve. It's decreasing like with a curve like this. I published a paper about this. So it's called the break-even point and presented in Torino, by the way. And at the break-even point, the cost of urbanizing land is higher than the additional GDP it will produce. In a sense, you will urbanize more land and it will produce less GDP than it costs to urbanize the land. So this is a challenge. So there are two challenges for the, 2 or 3 challenges for the developing cities. One is to limit the sprawl because they will never be able to provide for the infrastructure. And this comes to the not only affordability, but the inclusiveness. If people don't have sewage, don't have streets, don't have infrastructure, it will be very detrimental for the prosperity and inclusiveness. And they should provide connective linkages to connect people to work, because and then the economy will thrive. So basically, and there is a very strong linkage between this and affordability. The cost of living in African cities is 30% higher than the cost of living in cities of comparable income. And it's always very frightening when I go to Africa to see how expensive things are in Africa. It's crazy expensive. Africa, for us, is more expensive than Europe, much more expensive. And even for Africans, it's super expensive. And the big part of it is really linked to the urban form. So creating an efficient urban form, and then you can look, because I wanted really to make a change in my life and to present something about the beauty and the good city form. But I have spent the last 10 years also doing special economics. So if you are interested in, I can provide Daniele, and you can share links and papers and books about special economics. But I was assuming that I was talking to architects and not to economists, but I am also a special economist.
Okay, thank you so much for your answering. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and maybe we can use some more minutes to discuss with Serge Salat. So I'm collecting some free questions.
Oh, Daniele, before, what did you do about the question about the essence of Chinese space? I spent a lot of thinking.
Yeah, of course. I would like to just to go through that, because I was asking if someone outside the groups wants to address a questions, please write me. And in the meanwhile, maybe group 5 and 12 can address another question to Serge Salat.
I want to answer the question about Chinese space. First, I want to see who was asking the question.
No, but go for that answer, because maybe I think it's interesting for everyone, and we were discussing with Serge about this answer to a question that some students actually wrote down yesterday in order to be shared with Serge.
Who is a student? Can the student ask the question?
This is surely from group 5, I think, or group 12. So please, if the students is there.
The student will read in French my book about Japanese space. That's why I want to see the student.
Let's see if group 5, okay.
Chen Yang, you are reading French.
So please let us hear your voice and see your face. Okay, great. Your mic is off.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your lecture. It's really interesting. The first question is written by me. Is about like, as from the lecture, you also said that the beauty of the city is also made of by some volumes, by some freedom space maybe. So I also researched some of your books. And I have one question about the floating bridge of the dreams. You mentioned some space of Japan. So about this, you used 2 words of spacing and Oko to discuss about this is the heart of the anthropology of the Japanese space. But for me, as we all know, in China, with the development of the urbanism and so there is a lot of the complex questions about the new town and the old town. So there are also some totally freedom spaces like the Wallens still happened in the old town. So I want to ask you, how can we to balance this value between the different types of the Wallens? For example, in Spain, in the Barcelona, the blocks is similar because the Wallens is similar because they surrounding the residential spaces of the blocks. So, but in China, as for China, there is a lot of the columns are not very uniform and not very clear. So I mean, how to balance which kind of the columns can be used or can be redesigned for the space. Yeah, something like
Very
this.
good question. By the way, I have a question for you too, because the Yume no Ukiyashi in Japanese, the floating bridge of dreams, has been published only in French. How did you you read French, or how did you?
No. I don't read French. I just searched for some like the research and translated it. Yeah.
Oh, great! You're really, because I'm always impressed by the Chinese. Once I was giving an interview in Shanghai, and a Chinese journalist asked me about my relationship with Christian religion, because I have been writing a thesis about the relationship between the space of God and the space of God and the space of humans in a Christian religion. And I was really totally surprised, because this is an unpublished thesis. So there's never been, so I was, it's in French, it's unpublished. And they know I have been writing something about it. I have been even writing 1,000 pages, which are still unpublished. Okay, let's so you have made research and you have translated. Great, you are a very good researcher. So, yeah, first the unique Japanesness of the Ma, which is a space-time interval, which is loaded with emotion and which is showing the how to say, it's just the Japanese space is not something physical, it's just something really emotional, and it's in theater, in architecture, in landscaping, and you create tension between and you materialize time and space and emotion with this. And then Oku is about wrapping interiority, and it has an invisible interiority, but it's not void into the interiority. Into the interiority there is a kami, and the kami is the fact that you have the divinities and gods into everything in Japan. And so materializing a space with a rope or an invisible temple is that you create, and this is being used by architects like Fumiko Maki, who is a friend of mine. I've written a book about him in his architecture and city planning. And this idea, all the Japanese architects are, not all, but many Japanese architects are really deeply involved in researching the specificities of Japanese space and what is so unique in Japanese space. That's why it's all the more disappointing that in China there is nothing like this happening, or very few things like this happening. I remember something like 30 years ago, I was at the Art Institute of Chicago, and there were brilliant young students like you, but the generation before, and they were showing projects with a lot of Chinese cosmology to their American professors. The American professor was not understanding anything, but yes, he was a professor. He was pretending to understand something and to give guidance to the student. And it was looking like the new generation of young Chinese architects will go back to China and will create a kind of a Chinese architecture and urbanism, which would involve Chinese cosmological concepts, anthropological concepts of the Chinese culture into Chinese urban development. And this absolutely didn't happen. And what happened instead was a kind of much more Le Corbusier Soviet style growth of Chinese. But to come back to the question, like Daniele was translating to me, how would it be possible? And actually, the question was really, how to say that, moving for me, because 30 years ago, when I wrote The Floating Bridge of Dreams, I was planning to write a series of 3 books, one about Japan, done, one about China, and one about India. India, I don't think I will ever write the book because it will require me to learn Sanskrit, and I will never be able to learn Sanskrit. About China, yeah, I can read Chinese basically, and I know because first to understand you need to understand the concepts in the language, not like in translation. And then I had been thinking, and one of the ideas is something I have been showing you, and the fact that you have this sexuality, you have the system of enclosures, but this is basically more or less universal, even if it is Chinese. The walled city, for example, is all the cities have been walled. The grid, the Roman city was gridded. The axiality, the pre-Hispanic cities in South America were with actual ceremonial axes. So, by the way, what is so typically Chinese in Chinese architecture, in Chinese urban form? And I ended up this morning by the idea that it's not really, and one way I did it in Japan was not just looking at cities or at buildings. I was looking at painting, I was looking at theater, I was looking at and probably if I would have to try to look at this, I would explore 2 concepts, but I still need to explore them. One is the ma, like the interval, like the same character in Chinese as in Japanese, the median void in a sense, but Chinese way, like in Chinese culture, like the emptiness between mountains and clouds in the painting and the river, which would lead more to geomancy and to kind of cosmological approach but typically in Chinese way, and then yeah. So, but why is the median void different in China than in Japan? And that could become the very interesting question. And I think if I would explore that more, I would introduce not feng shui is part of it. I was talking, but I would introduce a very fundamental concept, which is qi, in Chinese characters, and I cannot write Chinese on my and so the vital force forming part of any living entity. And in a sense, when you look at calligraphy, Chinese calligraphy, and Chinese painting, and Chinese ancient cities design, they all express the movement of qi. And this could be a wonderful study to do, the vital force forming part of any living entity. And it will also relate to my lecture about beauty and life. And organized complexity in China is about the qi flowing through entities, and material energy, life force, energy flow. And this you could find in Chinese traditional medicine, Chinese martial arts, and the idea that the qi should be balanced. And I think deeply we can analyze the Chinese city plan with this concept of qi, median void, and maybe a third concept, or maybe, but qi is really so typically Chinese that I would take it as a guiding line to and as you say, oh, can we balance? Yeah, probably you should look at traditional architectures in China, traditional villages, traditional city forms, and not look so much at the form, but looking more at their qi, and look at contemporary developments and look at their qi. I don't know, for people who are not familiar with Chinese martial arts or Chinese calligraphy. I practice Chinese calligraphy, so that's probably is the answer. I don't know if I have answered to you, but this is what I would like. And so you gave me the desire again to write this book after 30 years not writing it.
Unfortunately, we lost Chen's connection at a certain point, but his group actually took note about your second part of the answer. So I think he'll be able to just to listen to this last part. There are students writing me that they would like to read something more about the topic you mentioned before, the relationship between the space of God and the space of the humans. You say that your thesis is unpublished, but maybe if after we can chat a little more, if you have some references on this topic, I think some students will be interested in it. And just maybe for a last question, I will ask group 12 if they can propose us one last question. They asked at a certain point the possibility to do that. So once again, the floor is yours. If you, Serge, have some few minutes to spend.
Yeah, of course, no problem. It's not my time, it's your time. I don't want to abuse the time. It's fine.
So group 12.
Okay, hello again. Sorry, this video. Actually, we are group not 12, we are group 21, but it's okay. No, it's not problem. So we have also other question. So according to the Stis and Form published in 2011, you discussed the isolation of closed communities from residents in the La Défense business district. So for China, in the planning of modern cities, the increase in building height brings the vertical accumulation of single functions. If we are trying to reduce the negative impacts, we can combine different type of people to superimpose the different using time. Is there any specific solution for this?
Yes. First, you describe the verticality and the zoning of functions. First, the problem should should come from the solution should come from the planning itself. The planning itself is very violently Corbusian and zoning space according to functions and segregating functions. And even when Chinese talk about, planners talk about mixed use, sometimes can be really very surprising. I visited very huge scientific area in Beijing, north of Beijing, 100 kilometers north of Beijing 10 years ago. It was as big as probably 3 or 4 times Torino. And this is mixed use. In this area, 20 square kilometers, we will have the hotels. And this other area, we will have the research lab. And this area is just like 200 square kilometers. And you will have the companies, and it's totally strictly forbidden to have a residential there. And in the other area, south of the lake, 20 kilometers away, we will have the residents. And altogether, it's mixed use because we have residences, hotels, and offices. I said, no, mixed use is at the scale of a single building. It's not at the scale of a territory 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers by zoning. What you describe is not mixed use, is zoning. They didn't seem to understand at all. And most of the master plans in China are really deeply zoned at a wide scale. And so there is this thing that the master plan is zoning. The second thing is that the buildings are isolated towers in green space, in super blocks with a huge, so this is really pushing towards not mixed use at all, because you have residential towers and the program are, then you have these very identical things which are also pushed by the market. Frankly, it's quite difficult to have mixed use in the new form of Chinese urbanization. So first you should change the form of the Chinese urbanization with more fine grain and the streets and another thing, but which not just like in China, it's also true in Europe. Why don't architects, urban designers explore again the typology of courtyard forms? It's just imagine China as a story of 5,000 years of urbanization with courtyard forms, and now suddenly they build towers. They've been building towers for the last, you just compare something like 30 years. 30 years is a short time span compared to 5,000 years. 5,000 years of courtyard forms, and suddenly 30 years of vertical high-rise. Why? Because of the influence of modernist planning. But there is absolutely no, and there is not even a reason of density. If you look at Beijing, and this is one of the very striking results, I should publish something about it. Beijing in 1945 was more denser, had more inhabitants per square kilometer than Beijing today within the second ring road, the historical part of Beijing. The courtyard, the traditional courtyard Seheyuan in Beijing is more dense than the big high-rise tower. Why? Because you have a lot of empty space in between the high-rise tower. So come back to the previous question, rebalancing should be tried. It doesn't mean building Seheyuan traditional way everywhere. Means like exploring with contemporary architecture, courtyard forms and narrow streets. And then you come to the story that you are not able to manipulate urban form because all the road engineering in China requires very wide roads. So, and with the very wide roads plus the setbacks, you can have only, so you first need to change the regulation. That was because of the discussion this morning with Daniele, it was very interesting for that. You cannot create any courtyard form in China because of the regulation. The regulation is really, in a sense, it's a Soviet regulation, which is Soviet type regulation, which is imposing the new form, and the new form is absolutely hostile to I wouldn't say that traditionally. I have a wonderful book called Urban Housing Handbook, which is showing traditional urban forms for housing. And then for each urban form, it's in many different continents and many different countries, there is a contemporary project. It's totally contemporary, but which is using the typology of the housing, like a row house, British style, and then you have different types of row houses in England, and then you have contemporary projects using this type, and you have also houses in Japan using the Machiya typology, but entirely contemporary. The Japanese have been very good at creating contemporary houses using the typology and the space syntax of the Japanese things. And in China, it would be the same thing. And in a sense, it's close to the answer to the previous question. Come back to the essence of 5,000 years of urban form, and you may discover that it answers to contemporary needs better than and that's really also interesting, because you have in terms of forms and in terms of the history of forms, when are these forms are used in China, but also used everywhere in the developing world, invented? They are invented by Le Corbusier and a few theoreticians in 1920s, in the cradle of the rise of totalitarianism and fascism in Europe. Le Corbusier is a fascist, totally fascinated by Hitler and totally applauding Hitler's rise to power and saying that Hitler is good for Europe and all the drama in Europe is because of the Jews and they should be eradicated. Le Corbusier has been writing things like that. So he invents this. And the second part of this legacy comes from the mechanization. Okay, mechanization takes command, but what mechanization? The mechanization of 1920s. So we are entering, and we are already in the 2020s of the 21st century, with people like you who are really people of the 21st century. And China, and not only China, is urbanizing with patterns invented 1 century before, with a total different technology, which may absolutely not fit the requirements of the new economy, of the digital economy. And there are proofs of that, because the digital economy is developing actually in the most traditional parts of the city. So nobody in New York, in London, and in the most traditional urban fabric is where the digital economy is developing. So there is no assessment nowhere of the potential, not of creating new Sahayuan or a pastiche of the whole Sahayuan, but of the potential of creating contemporary courtyard forms that will accommodate the recreate communities and accommodate the needs of the new economy and create this mixed use that you are calling for. Because of course, the mixed use cannot be developed into the tower system, because the tower system has been invented by Le Corbusier just for segregating functions. So you are not going to reintegrate mixed use into an urban form which has been created for segregation of functions. But all the previous urban forms before this theoretical change in the 1920s were mixed use, but they were entirely different. So that's why it's just like, and that's why urban morphology is really very important, because I have just started to address the immense variety of urban forms. If you just, one of my dreams also, but I would need the students and the lab again, would be to write a book about the history of blocks. Not the history, but the how to say that, like natural histoire naturelle, natural the people who started to classify nature and life into different types, and all these museums of natural history that are around, and all the natural history typology that appeared, and you could really start to create trees of evolution. For example, all the and I finish on that. You take the Roman Insula, okay, and then you have the Roman Insula in Italy, and then you have the Roman Insula, which starts to diversify into different families with cousins, sisters, brothers, and this will give the Italian city blocks, which are different. The blocks in Torino are different in the legacy of the Roman Empire. They're different from the ones in Firenze, and they were different from the ones in Bologna. So, but they are of course different from the ones in Germany, in the parts of Germany occupied by the in England, they have evolved differently. So just imagine the Roman Empire was creating the same type of cities everywhere in Europe, and then from this initial ancestor of the bloc came hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different cities with thousands of different blocks that can be organized into types, and we could make a natural history of the urban bloc, and not only in Europe. And then you could look at the urban bloc in Asia and the way there has been influence and mixture between the Dutch and the Chinese in Southeast Asia, in areas like Malaysia and Malacca, which created the Singapore shop house and the Malacca shop house. Is a fusion, like a fusion in cuisine of creating another type of urban block. Very few people are really looking at it, and this is a gigantic potential of form creation, which wouldn't be recreating shop houses, recreating Roman blocks, or recreating anything, but understanding how to create the next generation. And instead of creating the next generation of the urban block with contemporary architecture, there has been a brutal stop of the history, wiping everything on the slate of cities with the vertical forms. And so we should really make a fundamental change. Okay, I hope I have answered your question.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question, and thanks for the answer, Serge. And maybe we can close our interaction here. I would like to thank you for your time and your interaction with us this morning and this afternoon with the students. I would like to thank all the students that participated in this discussion, those who asked questions, and those who are simply attending this conference. I personally learned a lot, and I think one thing that remains me of this discussion is the attention we have to put in recognizing the city form, and in recognizing the ways in which it developed, and even as designers, the ways in which old city forms that developed in a previous time in a different set of rules, this morning we discussed a lot about it, can welcome now new system of interactions and economies and users and activities. So this for me is what I just bring to my house in this afternoon, and I hope all of us have something to bring with us. I leave the floor to Francesca, and I remember, no, okay, she said no. And I just remember Francesca and Serge, if we can just meet for a few minutes after the conference in a separate room. You have already the link in your email. Thanks again to everyone, and thanks to Serge Salat for this time.
Okay, thanks everybody, and yeah, let's meet. I connect to the other room just now.
Great.
Okay, good. I'm going to do that. Okay, thank you everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye to all the students. Okay.